is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming. Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Okay, thank you everyone. Good morning. A few IT issues to start the morning off, but that won't deter us. We'll soldier on. I'd firstly like to open the meeting, and I'd like to begin with the acknowledgement to country, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians in the land in which we meet today, the Darumbal people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Also extend that in respect to our neighbouring Aboriginal peoples within our local government area, the Gungaloo Nation people, the Barada, Kabalbara and Yeddamarala people. Also acknowledging the Torres Strait Islander people whose lands are in the Torres Strait, but who live and work on Aboriginal land. So good morning, councillors, good morning officers and visitors. Firstly, we'd call for apologies and leave of absence. I see Councillor Kirkland and Councillor Latcham are online, so we have a full complement. Moving right on to the confirmation of the minutes from the previous meeting. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Move Councillor Smith, seconded Councillor Wickerson. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Councillor Kirkland? Yep, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to declarations in interest in matters on the agenda, councillors. I'm not sure whether we've had any forwarded on, but in that case, we'll, if there's something that arises during the course of the meeting, please let us know. Councillor Smith did have one? Yep. Okay. With the pipeline and Mount Morgan water in the...
10.4.
10.4, okay.
The first one on the list, Mount Morgan Water Supply Pipeline Project.
Okay. Righto.
So I'll leave the room.
You'll leave the room on that one when that item comes up. Yep. Okay, no worries. Thanks, Councillor Smith. No other declarations. If not, we'll walk through the course of the meeting, and if there is anything that pops up during that time, please make us aware. Business outstanding nil, public forums deputations nil, presentations of petitions nil, council delegate reports nil. We'll move straight into the officers' reports. 10.1, the Fitzroy Barrage Northern Bank Fish Passage. I'll pass over to Martin to present that report. Thanks very much, Brian.
Thanks, Mayor. Morning, councillors. This morning I'm presenting a report on the Fitzroy Barrage Northern Bank Fish Passage. Joining me online this morning is Mark Cope, who's a project manager for the Rookwood Weir from Sunwater, and also have Dale McNabb, who's a senior project engineer and working on this particular project for Sunwater, just in case there's any particular questions around the Rookwood Weir project and this fish passage in particular that require Sunwater's response. Councillors may recall that approximately 12 months ago, about November last year, Council were approached about whether we would consider installing or having installed a fish passage on the northern bank of the barrage. Since that time, Council have had an internal working group working with Sunwater's people on that, just developing that proposal and that project. Front of mind, as was put in the report back in August this year, is that any particular fish passage that was going to be located on the barrage was not to impact Council's water security, not to obviously impinge across the structural integrity of the barrage, was not to impede our operations and our maintenance, was future-proofed if we did want to raise the barrage by 1/2 metre sometime in the future, and obviously site security was front of mind as well. Now, since that time, we've had officers from my area, infrastructure planning, Fitzroy River Water, legal and governance and property insurance working on this internal working group on the necessary agreements that would need to be put in place and the designs that would need to be put in place to make this happen. Now, where we've landed at this point in time is that we've developed a agreed set of terms that would go into a set of legal agreements. Now, I've placed the terms of the agreement in confidential business primarily because the legal agreements themselves would be dealt with in confidential business, so it was logical to me that any terms that were going to be incorporated in those legal agreements would also be treated confidentially. And certainly the offset delivery plan is a internal Sunwater Department document, which I didn't really have the authority to release at this point in time. That's a submission they need to make to Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. But generally speaking, council officers are fairly satisfied that we've been able to address all the major issues that would come along with the fish passage on the northern bank of the barrage. Where we've landed is that we need essentially 4 types of agreements to make this happen. So it's probably a little bit more complicated than what we originally thought. But the first agreement is a development agreement, which basically just sets out the overall terms and conditions relating to the design, construction and ownership. There's an easement in gross that we need to put over part of the northern bank, part of the property that council owns, and this is simply to secure the appropriate tenure. Given that Sunwater are going to retain ownership of the fish ladder, they need a certain amount of security over the tenure to have that on our site. The services agreement is simply an agreement that covers the operations of the fish passage. Through the agreements, Sunwater are going to retain basically ownership and maintenance responsibility for the fish ladder, but the operations, which essentially is visual inspections, operating the SCADA system, the power supply and the fencing for the site, is something that will be done by council, but under a commercial arrangement. So council will not be or lose out on that arrangement. There's also the offset delivery plan, as I mentioned before. This is simply a document that Sunwater themselves need to submit to the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries to meet their approval requirements for the development approval for Rookwood Weir. I included that essentially just to give a councillor a flavour as to the reasoning as to why the fish ladder is seen as a benefit to our community. Basically, and I'm a bit nervous having Patrice sitting in here, I'm going to start talking ecological benefits, but essentially it's the barrage itself is still considered a barrier to fish movement from the lower estuary up into the upper reaches of the Fitzroy, and apparently from my reading on it, we have a number of fish species that require to move between salt water and fresh water to go through their breeding and spawning. So what we expect to see out of the movements of these fish is a greater fisher habitats produced, which should over time increase fish stock. That to me ties into council's overall fishing strategy of trying to improve fishing within our community and also increase fishing tourism. So I think there are benefits for our community going forward by improving or removing some of the barriers to fish movement. I think in the offset delivery plan it does talk about our existing fish ladders that are on the southern bank, and they do pass hundreds of thousands of juvenile fish at a time, but we're talking hundreds of thousands out of millions of juvenile fish that are trying to move across the barrier. So any improvements we can make to that will only improve the fish stock within our reaches of the river system. The other thing I need to mention there is To incorporate the fish ladder on the northern bank, we also need to amend our Fitzroy Barrage Water Supply Resource Operations Licence. This licence allows council basically to operate the barrage on the river, to interfere with water on the river, and necessarily lists out the structures that are allowed basically across the river. So it includes our barrage, but it also includes the fish ladders we currently have on the southern bank. So if we're going to allow one to be built on the northern bank, we need to amend that licence to have that listed on our licence as well. At this point in time, as I said, the internal working group have been working with Sunwater for over 12 months now. We believe the agreements or the terms that have been encapsulated in the attached document address all the major issues that have been identified by council and council officers, and we're comfortable that they now move forward into the formal documents. Once the formal documents are produced and we're happy they're consistent with the terms that we've agreed upon, we're then seeking council's approval for the CEO to enter into those agreements. That's the basis of the report. I'm happy to take questions. Anything more ecological, I'm happy to throw to Patrice or Dale McNabb. I think is probably the one who can probably answer a little bit more about fish migration and those sorts of things.
As a Mad King fisherman, Martin, I'm very supportive of this. I think recruitment's a big thing that we need to have having the barrage as an impediment. And any support to that recruitment is something there that can benefit the whole system going forward. Just security is probably the other question. I know we have a great deal of problem there with illegal fishing off the barrage, and has that been something that was covered off there? I think I read in the report there was something there mentioned, but just understanding with the south side problems.
Yeah, well, my understanding, and these are conversations that Evan Davis and from FRW has been leading with our Sunwater friends. Essentially, the site will be secure, and the security fence will be reinstated, but extended to, as best we can, prevent any illegal fishing from that site. We're well aware of the problems on the southern side. I think the northern side actually lends itself a little bit better to being able to tie that side off a bit more secure than the south side.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Martin. I've got a couple of lights on there, so I'll go to questions. Councillor Rutherford, Councillor Wickerson, Councillor Mathers.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and it's along the same lines because I'm really very concerned about having another fish ladder there with the amount of illegal fishing we have on the south side, and the littering and the trespassing and everything else. And it surprises me that Evan has said that you can fence it, because they're telling me we can't fence the south side, and most of that is because of flood. So, I'm really concerned, how come we can fence north side but not the south side, and who's going to be responsible? Are we then going to have to put up lighting and, cleaning up after people and the whole gamut that goes with it that we have on the south side fish ladder?
I suppose I can answer in a general sense that the discussions around fencing the site have been held between FRW and Sunwater, and they have been incorporated into the design plans. Obviously, you can't take fences right down into the water itself, because that doesn't seem to work, but we do have a number of, at least one area where I think we can tie the fence over to a property boundary that will help secure the site a little bit better. As for impacts on fencing and those sorts of things, and clean up of litter, council will be entering into a service agreement with Sunwater. Those operational type matters would be incorporated into that service agreement. So any costs that would shift to council, we would expect to see covered off by that operations or that services agreement.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, through the chair. It's the flooding issue, so the fence during flooding, and that was one of the biggest issues for the not being able to fence the south side as well. So I'm confused that, the river floods both sides. How can we put a fence one side and not the other?
Yeah, I think my recollection of the site, the fencing we can put up on the higher bank, The difficulty, I believe, with the south side is that you've got an extensive vacant area of bank, what would you say, 100, 150 metres of bank that heads southward, or south-eastward, southward anyway. That is very difficult to fence off.
Some Dale, is it? So you might be able to answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're just coming off mute. So just to expand on Martin's comment there, the nature of the parkland that is on the left bank, or the side we're talking about, there's the ability to extend the parallel fence, or the fence that runs parallel to the riverway, right down to a private property boundary there. So in terms of access through there, we do have a topographic sort of boundary sort of benefit on this side of the river that you don't necessarily have on the other. And also, as Martin sort of said there, with regards to maintenance and cleaning and things like that, Sunwater have budgeted for an ongoing sort of maintenance cost. So where there are minor activities such as cleaning up rubbish and general tidy up of fence repairs, that kind of thing, that would be considered part of that operational maintenance service aspect that would be reimbursed by Sunwater or managed by Sunwater, whichever the two operational organisations sort of prefer to run it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we're reasonably comfortable with the northern bank. I think it's the southern bank the councillor is referring to, and the fencing on the existing fish ladder on the south side. Yeah, Councillor Rutherford, I think.
Mr Mayor, I'm just wondering, so there's a park next to the barrage there. So is that whole park going to be fenced between the park and the river now? Is that what?
There is a fence, existing fence in, yeah.
The downstream side of it, between, I suppose, the barrage and the property on the downstream side, remembering most of the park is on the upstream side, so that wouldn't be fenced.
Saltwater side?
Yes.
It's not fenced, the fresh
No,
water?
the saltwater side would be fenced. The freshwater side would not be fenced.
Thanks, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Wickerson?
Thanks, Mr Chair. Just a couple of questions if I can. And the first one will be just to chime in on the fencing. Property owners have this problem all the time out in the rural areas when they have flooded creeks and whatever. So is there any chance to have maybe fencing that could be removed or can lay down or pivot or something like that? We have the benefit of some forewarning that we're going to get a flood most times. So just to have something that still does a good job of security but won't be torn away when debris and whatever comes down. Just consideration.
I'd be happy to look at that. I mean, we do use that type of fencing at the airport, as you're probably aware, Councillor Wickerson. The fence in this would predominantly be running parallel with the flow, so it might not be impacted as much, but it's certainly something we can look at.
Okay, no, very good. Now, the questions I had earlier, I was pleased to read about the future-proofing of the fish ladder, so that when and if we do raise it at 500 mils, but I imagine because the fish ladder is fairly of a flat grade to let the fish swim up against the reduced current that we make, that 500 mil would transfer into a fairly long linear ladder. So in the budgeting, is there going to be a reserve put aside so that when that time comes, we've got to extend it, that there is funding there to do that work? And I guess it's on the south side as well. Will have to be extended to accommodate that rise?
Yeah, I think if council do decide to go ahead with raising of the barrage in the future, that they are project costs that will need to be incorporated in that project. At this point in time, all we've allowed for in the design is that the design does not present or prevent that happening, so that, and the design can be modified relatively easily to accommodate the extra half a metre lift.
Yeah, okay, no, that's great. And the final one, through the working group, when you're looking at the fish ladder, I absolutely support this for all the reasons you said, and Mayor, too, about our future position as the fishing capital. I mean, we've got to do everything we can to support that. That it'll also work the other way, where we put fingerlings up in the freshwater part that they can migrate backwards and forwards. But in the working group's discussions, did any conversation come up about other minor fish passages and that in some of our minor roads? I'm thinking, well, one that sprung to mind was Moores Creek. I know that's not up above the barrage, but there are other rural roads we have with small culverts and things that still have smaller barriers, the fish can't get up there, might be a 300 mil lip or whatever. So did that come up in discussions as well?
Not necessarily in this particular working group, although very early in the piece when Sunwater were looking at where they wanted to locate this fish passage, they did use the FBA's prioritisation tool, and certainly that identifies a lot of little rural areas where there are barriers to fish movement. But I believe the barrage was chosen because it opens up. There's a certain amount of habitat that's lost through the Rookwood Weir project, and upgrading the barrage just opens up enough habitat, or impacts enough habitat to offset the impacts of the Rookwood Weir project. Having said that, through our own design process on rural roads and those sorts of things we do now take account of all the fish passage issues, and depending on the colour of the stream and all those sorts of things, it modifies our design to allow fish passage through culverts and those sorts of things. So as things get upgraded over time, they'll be upgraded to meet that current legislation.
Okay, no, that's great. Thanks, Martin.
Thanks, Councillor Wickerson. Councillor Mathers.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Through you to Martin, if that's okay. The first thing I wanted to say is, look, I think this is a great project. Anything, the more fish and fingerlings we can get upstream of the barrage, the better that's going to help with the health of the waterway and the river system. So, excuse me, I'm very much in support of the project as such. The couple of questions I do have, Martin, is in regards to the future proofing, which is great to see we've allowed for that. Carrying on from what Councillor Wickerson was saying, excuse me, if we do decide to lift the height of the barrage into the future, whose cost would it be to actually extend the height of the fish ladder at that point?
I think, given that the unknown nature of it at this point in time, that cost would be council's to bear. But we've been fairly careful in making sure it's a fairly easy modification to the fish passage. So.
Martin, I've got one of the consultants there. Question. Just got his hand up there. Did you want to answer that one?
Sorry, I just with that, Martin. Thanks for answering that. But the agreement currently contemplates that Sunwater will incur the cost of a raising. So we've worked hard to limit the costs going forward, so Martin is right in that, but a raise up to 0.5 metre is considered within Sunwater's remit to incur the cost of that.
So technically what we've done is we've made the channel longer, and then when the raising does occur, we can put additional baffles in through that additional channel. So it's future-proof through that, so the additional work is relatively straightforward and managed up to that 0.5 metre threshold, which Sunwater is managing as part of our cost, should and when that happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Mathers.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Thank you very much for that. So that's great, because I was wondering how, because it wasn't just the height, it was the length, so you're building it long enough to equate for that. So, all right, that's great to see that you've looked into that. The other question I've got, if it's all right, Mr Mayor, I've got two more, if that's all right, is in regards to this. There's a very in-depth report that we've got. Thanks very much for that. But, there's no real detailed design plan. So what I was wondering is in regards to, is the fish ladder built completely separately to the barrage? I suppose what I'm saying is, does it put any stress on the existing barrage now, or is it a standalone structure?
Yeah, I'll be happy for Sunwater to jump in on the design aspects as well, but the actual ladder will attach to the barrage, so it will structurally attach to the barrage, so there'll be some minor modification to the barrage to do that. Sorry, the second part of your question was...
So are we concerned that if it is attaching to it, that it will put...
Integrity of
is that going to put in extra stress?
No, we've basically been working through a number of sets of drawings, so at the 50% design stage they've sent us drawings. I think we're currently either 90 or 100% design plans have been sent to us. We've engaged GHD as our dam engineers, and who basically do our structural type works on the barrage to review all the Sunwater design plans to make sure that the integrity of the barrage won't be compromised by the works. So we've been fairly careful in that respect.
All right, thanks for that. Just one case.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm figuring that because it's being built downstream, if anything, hopefully that would help support it a little bit. You would think, but I'm not an engineer. So, and the last question I had is in regards to if we're doing that work around there, is there any way are we able to incorporate the works that I know we were supposed to be doing inspections of the barrage moving forward to make sure that the integrity was there if we did decide to raise the height of it. Are we able to try to incorporate those inspections as well while this part of it is being built? I'm just wondering if we can take advantage of the work that's being done.
There's probably certain aspects of the Fish Passage project that will help us eventually in our works, and Dale might want to chime in there, but there's certainly some geotechnical type works and those sorts of things which will be relevant to our future works. There's probably not a real lot else other than potentially getting some concrete samples from areas of the OG that needs to be reduced. That will give us some idea about the structural integrity of the concrete, given it was poured in 1970 and things like that. So there's probably some advantages we can take from this project. But I'm not sure if there's anything else we could really grab at this point in time.
Okay.
Martin, do you need any additional commentary to that, or is?
You feel free, Dale, if you.
So I will say, just to go to the point of the structural design of it, whilst it's connected, it is separate, so it supports itself. It's not relying upon the barrage structure and applying additional load to it. So we've tried to minimise the impact of it as much as possible. To do that, there's a number of mechanisms that we've used, and then in terms of how it will potentially benefit council, we've obviously completed a bunch of geotechnical investigations and works of that nature, and all of that work can be and will be provided to council when required.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for that, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Just a project cost, is there a dollar figure on that?
No, I haven't actually asked the question because it wasn't coming out of our pocket.
Just curious to see.
Yeah, we were just focused on protecting our interests more than the cost preservation for Sunwater, but it's up to Mark or Dale if they want to share that. I'm
They want to
not
keep
quite
it
sure if they do.
Commercial in confidence, it's not a biggie. I just thought I'd ask the question.
Yeah, it's no major issue. It's sort of somewhere between 3.5 to 4.5 million, we believe.
Okay.
We're expecting to go out to market in the next few months to find out what the real cost will be with the interesting times and construction escalations that we're seeing in the market at the moment.
We know all
Something
about
in
that.
range.
We know all about that one. It's impacting everyone, unfortunately. It's just the nature of the beast at the moment. But councillors, any questions online? If not, the resolution there that I'd seek a mover and a seconder with. Councillor Wickerson, seconded Councillor Mathers. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank Dale and Mark. Thanks very much for that. We'll move on to our next item. The closed landfill management 10.2. Michael, we'll hand over to you to present this one.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor, and good morning, councillors. So today is a bit of a take two on the report we presented a couple of months with Patrice as well around a full environmental review that we did on our Lakes Creek Road landfill. This is a review and an update to council on the current status of all of our historic closed landfills. RIWR manage all of the closed landfills that we're aware of on behalf of council. A lot of work's been done over the last 20 to 25 years to try and understand where these landfills are and some of the likely risks and management practices that we need to adopt to manage those risks. Importantly, along that journey, we've always tried, and before my time as well, tried to balance council's obligations with also the amount of money we spend on managing these closed landfills. So we know that we've got around 30, a little bit over 30 closed landfills in our region. They're the ones that we know about. And there are 5 closed landfills that are currently on our existing environmental authority as operating landfills, which which aren't operating, but we'll go through the details around that a little bit later. So there's a PowerPoint. I'm going to invite Patrice Brown from CQG to come up and present the PowerPoint. Patrice has done an enormous amount of work for us in this space over that period of time. Patrice has got one of her colleagues with her as well, Ed Rice, and she may call upon him to speak if her voice goes. Thanks, Patrice.
Thanks, Patrice. Hasn't legislation changed over the years? It's just to dig a hole and throw rubbish in it and walk away and leave it for somebody else to manage in years to come. So
Combustion fire at 445
yeah, yeah. But no, I'll hand over to you to present that report. Thanks, Patrice.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Ed Rice is our CQG's environmental manager in our Rockhampton office.
Welcome, Ed.
I think it's probably about 10, 15 years ago since I presented to Council on closed landfills, so it's good to be back. And I've had the privilege of working on closed landfills for Rockhampton Regional Council, I think for 26, 27 years now, so in various companies, including CQG for the last almost 20 years. And one of the good parts of the story is that Rockhampton Regional Council has been very proactive during that time in doing the right thing after closed landfills, under various management, including Greg Merry, Craig Douglason, and now under Michael O'Keefe's management. And I know, Councillor Neil Fisher, you've been there for a lot of that journey. So today's story is just sort of talking through the story of the closed landfills and just sort of bringing you up to date about what the legislation requirements are today, but understanding that it'll change in the future as well, like we've seen change in the last 25 years, and being aware that change in the future, we don't know what those requirements might be. So across Australia, but also across the world, there are closed landfills, many, and we call them tips, rubbish dumps, all sorts of names. But typically they are in places that are also sensitive environmental areas, like creeks and wetlands that people just found convenient to dump their rubbish. A lot of these places now are used for sporting fields and playgrounds. Often we find these surprises when people are digging up trenches and things to put pipes and electrical cables in, like we have here in Rockhampton. In the Rockhampton local government area, we know there's over 30 closed landfills that have been documented, and there's likely to be many, many more. And even when I was preparing this set of slides, someone rang me up and said, hey, you know about this asbestos that's been dumped down near Gavial Creek many years ago by Rocky Regional Council. Now, these sort of reports that come in that are anecdotal information. Some of them end up being, just rumours, but there's others that pop up from time to time. But we need to, for those responsibilities, we need to investigate and see if it is in fact true. Now, Rockhampton Regional Council is not responsible for all the old dump sites and things in the region, because a lot of those were privately owned properties where people had their old incinerators and things. So we just need to be aware of that as well as we go through. The ones that we are aware of in Rockhampton that are used for playgrounds or public spaces, and this is typical across the world, as I mentioned before, where they have been rehabilitated and had capping of sorts put on top, are Kershaw Gardens, Rugby Park, Victoria Park and ski gardens are typical examples of areas that used to be landfills, and many of us who grew up in this area remember them being old dumps. Other ones that are rural are the likes of Bajul, Gogango and Pink Lily, etc. Some of the other landfills that are still on the Environmental Authority or the licence are at Alton Downs, Bouldercombe, Gracemere, which only recently closed, Marmore, Mount Morgan, Racecourse Road, Mount Morgan Racecourse Road. Probably just go to the risk associated with landfills, old closed landfills, to be aware of, and we've all sort of seen it. We've gone either bushwalking or camping where we see bits of rubbish sort of sticking out the side of areas, and old car bodies and things. Is visual amenity. Public health is something to be aware of as well. It's not just about the environment, potential environmental impacts, but also it's people can be cut. There can be people can trip or fall. There's also landfill gas. So landfill gas I talked about when we talked about Lakes Creek Road landfill. if a landfill's been closed for less than 30 years, there is a risk that you can get gas build-up and contaminated materials, particularly if it's anywhere near an old farm or a chemical manufacturing plant or a workshop. There can be contaminated old drums and things buried there. And you can also have soil, surface water and groundwater. There can be contamination that can come off these old landfills. Thank you. Now, anyone who is in this area remembers Kershaw Gardens and the great cyclone of 2015 on the 20th of February, where we saw over 200 trees tipped over at Kershaw Gardens. Now, that was a godsend in a lot of ways, because that did expose the shallow rooting that was at Kershaw Gardens, because those trees couldn't put down deep roots because the landfill material that was underneath those trees. And it did expose that the capping in some areas at Kershaw Gardens wasn't deep enough across that park. So that was a large exercise that council went through at some expense, and also with support from the state government to help for that rehabilitation. That showed the sort of materials that sort of sits underneath these landfills. Thank you. So the journey so far, and this is a reminder, I guess, of going back to your comment, Mayor, that things have changed. There are laws and guidelines that came into effect. It really wasn't until the mid-1990s in Queensland, which wasn't that too far, it wasn't that long ago. It really made it clearer for councils and others on what the guidelines were for not just closing landfills, but where to put them and how to manage them. And in Queensland, typically closed landfills remain on Environmental Authority, that's their licences, and on the Environmental Management Register as a notifiable activities. They normally sort of stay on the Environmental Authority or the licence for about 30 years after they close, because that's deemed to be a risk for that period of time. They remain as a duty of care, as we've talked about before, under the Environment Protection Act, the Public Health Act and the Workplace Health and Safety Act, because they hold those risks, as we talked about before. But as I mentioned, that could change in the future. There could be new legislation that comes in. We don't know what's ahead of us, so it's really important that we, and you guys as elected members, are aware of where those landfills are, those closed landfills are, and continue to manage them. Thank you. So I won't run through all these, but just to be aware that over a period of time there's been a lot of activity, and again I mentioned before with different managers that you've had with Greg Berry, Craig Donaldson and now Michael O'Keefe under their management, behind the scenes have done a lot of work, a lot of proactive work to make sure that there's been identification of where these sites are, and some of that work includes some pretty innovative surveys to find out where the extents are of those landfills. There was a landfill remediation assessment program the Queensland Government funded back in 1996, and that kicked off a lot of investigations across Queensland, where councils actually went out and did some investigations to find out where their closed landfills were. And it was quite a surprise for a lot of councils to find out they had these landfills and then they were old sporting grounds. Now, councils legally didn't have to go and do anything about them. Under duty of care, they probably should have. And it's quite interesting to see how different councils across Queensland reacted to it. Rocky City Council at the time, were proactive and looked at a couple of the landfills, I think Rugby Park, Victoria Park, and Moores Creek, and did some investigations at that time. But you can see there's a number of steps, and there's a register set up in 2003, and that was quite a comprehensive exercise. We went out and interviewed a whole bunch of people, and the register is still in place today, and that's just something that continues to be updated, find out where these sites were. We interviewed a number of people. Some of those people have since passed away from their memories of when the material was brought into the site. Some of the people operated those sites, some are neighbours of those sites, and that was really, really valuable information. But we'll continue to, Michael's team has that register, and as that information comes in, and again, for your council staff and for councillors, if you have any of that anecdotal information, it's really important that that gets back to Michael's team so that that data and information can continue to build. So going back to the landfill remediation program from 2005, there's some recommendations that came out of that. So that's quite a long time ago. That's 17 years ago. It recommended and I was involved in that, working for another company just prior to that, 2002, when that program started. It was the groundwater monitoring program be established, and that was established. It recommended that the capping in horizontal extents be confirmed, and that was recommended. So that's 2005. A cyclone hit in 2015. That happened 10 years later. The recommendations were that Kershaw Gardens, Rugby Park and Moores Creek, that work be done to determine that capping in horizontal extents. Site post-closure management inspections be done. So some of that work was done in 2005. So just, I guess, these programs and recommendations, when they are presented, it's really important that they are taken quite seriously. Sometimes risks can be mitigated if they are, when they are tabled. Don't be shy of asking questions. What does this mean and what should we do about these things? Thanks. This is looking at, we talk about an EM31. This is a ground penetrating, non-intrusive investigation. This one was done at Jardine Park, and that shows, it's a thing you can either walk around with or you have it on your back of your vehicle, and it saves a lot of time and money, but it also gets information in a rapid way. And it shows hotspots, so you can see where we've got the circle over on the left-hand side. It shows that purple area, and it sort of measures conductivity. You can see the scale over here on the right-hand side. So that showed to us that indicated it could have been an area where material could have been buried. Now, it can also show, see some of the red lines, it can also show when there's pipes and things underground. So it can, sometimes it can show other things underground, or it can show an area that's been disturbed. Now, in this case, in Jardine Park, when we went and dug in that area, we found that it had been disturbed, but it wasn't waste material. But for other areas where we've gone in and dug, and we did find waste material. So it can save a whole heap of time rather than digging up and testing the whole site. Can really narrow in the focus. So we did that on a lot of closed landfill sites, and it actually helped us define the boundaries too on how wide the landfills were horizontally. Thank you. We also did it at Victoria Park. Now, Victoria Park was a really interesting one. I've personally did some investigations there some years ago for RoadTech before they put the new playground in, and there was a lot of soil that had to be removed where under the playground was. That had been material that was brought in from the old power station. Now, a lot of that, as I mentioned before, with Lakes Creek Road landfill and Rugby Park, is that some of that material itself can be contaminated. So that waste ash material has contaminants in it itself. So the contaminants that was found at Victoria Park under the playground before it was rehabilitated was that old ash. So all that had to be dug out and had to be taken over to Lakes Creek and then buried over there. The other thing about Victoria Park, there was a lot of old car bodies and some old war gear from the war days that were buried.
You didn't find a dinosaur there at all, Patrice?
No, not yet. But it was one of the more interesting sites. I'm sure there's a few other things there to dig out in Victoria Park. Thank you. And then again, there's another timeline here that there's a whole bunch of other investigations that have been done. A lot of these, again, under Michael's guidance, where there's been a more, rigid budget set and some action plans that Ed will go through and looking at some investigations of some of the closed landfills that we have in the area. Thanks. Might hand over to you, Ed, for a couple of slides.
Thanks, Patrice. Thanks, Ed.
Morning all. As Patrice mentioned, there's just a couple of sites that we will give you a glimpse into what Michael and his team have proactively been doing over the last 2 years or so. Alton Downs is the first example. These aren't in any particular order other than alphabetically rather than being by time. So this site ceased operation in 2005, and as the 30-year time frame that Patrice mentioned, which is typical of from when a site ceases activity to when it is deemed appropriate to remove it from the EA, that would see this site being removed in 2035. So CQG did a test pitting exercise in March 2020 to identify the areas of the site where the soil capping layer was and wasn't sufficient. And in April 2020, a soil capping exercise was undertaken by Michael's team, with us being present to sort of document and validate that for the purpose of removal from the EA. Boulder Combe, so operation was seized in 2000, so 2030 would be an appropriate, sort of typically an appropriate time to remove this site from Council's EA. An investigation was undertaken in April 21, with a soil capping exercise taking place in late 2021. Gracemere capping is currently underway, as you are all familiar at that site at the moment. Marmore, this late 1990s is when we estimate that the landfilling was ceased at this site. So we would expect in sometime in the 2030s for it to be suitable for removal from the EA. Test pitting exercise was undertaken in March 2020, and this is the most recent one that we actually completed with Michael's team in June 2022, doing the soil capping exercise to ensure that there was sufficient capping across the site as a whole. Mount Morgan Showgrounds, slightly different site, an interesting one, as it was only used for dumping of night soil, and it was operation was ceased in 1970s. Test pitting exercise was undertaken in March 2020, and in fact an application was then submitted to DES for removal of this site from the EA, which was successful. Mount Morgan Racecourse, this was another one that we did the final capping of this year in February 2022. Yeah, thank you. So I think the sort of take-home message for the work the Council's been doing recently, Michael's team in particular, is that Council has been very proactive in ensuring that these sites are efficiently capped, and what will be advantageous is the fact that Council has a lot of groundwater and surface water data at their disposal, and we've been actively collecting samples from these sites since 2014, and very useful data when it comes time to applying to remove these sites from Council's license, because we can validate that no environmental harm is being caused with the data that we have at our disposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Ed. When Ed talks about test pitting, what we do in that exercise, to have a closed landfill that's sort of deemed to be sufficiently soil capped, you have to have 1/2 metre of dirt that's sitting on top of it. So what we do is we go through and do usually have an excavator or small backhoe and sort of do a dig and then measure how deep it is. And if it's not deep enough, we do that exercise of bringing more soil in. And that's an important one to take into consideration, particularly with the likes of Kershaw Gardens. And that's one that we probably still, when we look at our risks going forward, that's one site that we still need to have a good look at, because we had the exercise of doing the investigation back in 2015, 2016, and there's probably some spots there that we probably just need to have a bit of a closer look at what was done compared to the recommendations to make sure it's still that it complies with legislation. Rugby Park, in recent times, it's another one that's I haven't sort of got it up there in the mix. We can go back to that previous slide, but Rugby Park's another site that's back in 2015 we did an investigation, and we had some concerns about it not having enough soil capping. And we recently went through and did an investigation there on that site, and that showed that since there's been top dressing that's happened in the last 7 years on that site, indications are, just from a very preliminary investigation on that site, that the capping looks like it's sufficient now, which is good, great indication. So it's those sort of things, just keeping an eye on those sites that have been identified as having waste material on there. That's just on the plain fields where we've done that investigation. So going forward, and also where Ed mentioned the after 30 years, you can wait for these sites for 30 years and leave them on your licence, but it's best to be proactive, like we've outlined there, that Mock's team's gone through and sort of capped those ones, and then we have that aftercare management plans and put it through the department, because it's better to get them off those environmental authorities sooner rather than later, because legislation changes as you go forward, so and hence that proactive sort of step, rather than sort of leave them on the licences as they are. Now, we don't know what's happening in the future with these sort of things. We don't know in the future whether there might be a requirement to dig up all old closed landfills. We just don't know what's ahead with them. But keeping an eye on that monitoring as we go forward. So the steps we've gone forward is finding the sites and extents of the sites, identify the risk, and having action plans in place. And keep in mind, thinking about all this, remember the Kershaw Gardens experience and keep that forefront at all times. If we look at a risk-based management decision, there's no need to go and panic with any of these things. It's just looking at those risks and identifying and acting on those risks. And the key focus is looking at those ones on the Environmental Authority, the licences. Thanks. And the way we've had the risk register set up, it's in this, the typical sort of risk register framework. A great thing that has been introduced in the council in recent times is having it on the GIS layers, and I know Angus and Michael were both some stage involved in that. So when people are going to do earth disturbing works within council, it comes up as one of the triggers, the dial before you dig. So if someone's going to go and dig in an area where there's an old closed landfill, that'll come up as a warning, so people know to take extra precautions with their safety plans and things. Because there's also regulatory requirements that you cannot take dirt off a site that's on the Environmental Management Register, like these closed landfills. It's illegal to take dirt off one of those sites and move it on to another lot. So there's certain things you've got to require to do. Thanks. So ongoing requirements, which I've sort of just touched on then, and again, we're working with Mike's team, is to apply to downgrade from the categories that are in the licence for the Alton Downs, Boulder Combe, Marmore and Mount Morgan Racecourse Road, and complete the capping and prepare the aftercare management plan and conduct the ongoing environmental monitoring and assess the stabilisation of data prior to consideration of the above. And when sites meet their 30-year post-closure and monitoring inspection data and support no impact, seek to apply or remove from EA depending on legislation. So it's just sort of working through those steps with these landfills. And the other, I might go to the next slide to see if I've captured it. I'll go to the next slide, thanks. It's important to always budget for and implement the aftercare management plans and site management plans. So the aftercare management plans, it's pretty simple the way that we've written them. It's really just checking on the sites, doing the general maintenance and care on those, continuing with some of the monitoring work that's required for them. It's things like Kershaw Gardens, making sure that we do the check against what was recommended back in the day. And the other things to keep in mind, if you're going to be leasing out any land or selling any land that are known old landfills, is let the tenants or the purchasers of the land know, and keeping an eye on new technology where relevant to reduce risk of old closed landfills, and ensuring your staff and the elected councillors are aware of closed landfills and the risk associated with them, and any of the compliance matters relating to closed landfills, like we're doing today with the briefing. And ensuring you've got good consultants on board. And I think as the last one we've mentioned, the continue with your dial before you dig, and you're using your layer with your GeoCortex system. I think that's it.
Thanks very much, Patrice.
Thank you.
I'll just wait. Just for the people online, there's a photo coming up of the Gracemere landfill with the capping that's occurring. That's
That's just been completed in the last couple of weeks. Hopefully getting hydromulching done this week.
might just talk in the mic. There's people online there, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah, so this project was only completed in the last week or two. Hoping to getting hydromulching done later this week. Just waiting on the availability of the contractor doing that. So this finishes, you know, probably about 70 to 80% of the final capping requirements for the Gracemere landfill. Unfortunately, the northern bat is very steep, and the northwestern corner that adjoins the commercial C&D landfill operation is also very steep. So we need to work with the adjoining land to try and get that filled up to a certain height so we can actually finish that capping, and that's probably going to be 10, 15 years away, but at least we've got the majority of that site now closed off.
Is there any possibility for future recreational activity on those sites? You know, whether it's some mountain biking or something like that, is it ever at a stage there, or are they just a no-go zone?
They can be. Like, this one hasn't been designed to be a future recreational area, but, you know, closed landfills across the world have been designed and have been closed to be, you know, football fields, you know, walking tracks, bicycle.
Well, I think even the Lakes Creek one was a plan to have that at sporting fields at a close point, filling up, back in the day, filling it up to create, you know, sporting fields into the future, but as cost.
So I just wanted to show you that one because I think it looks significantly better than what it did.
Yeah. 12 months ago. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Michael. Now, Councillor Latcham, is he online there? I was not sure.
Happy with everything, Mr Mayor.
You're right. Okay, I've got a few lights on around the table, so I'll go with that. I'll go to Deputy Mayor Councillor Fisher, Councillor Smith and Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
And then Councillor Kirkland.
Probably a question to Patrice. Into the future there, do you see that landfill mining in some areas within central Queensland will become a reality, that, you know, there's many metals and other materials that could have a value there that could warrant that?
Interesting question. I don't see it in our lifetime.
No. It's Mount Morgan Mines just started to think about opening that up when they got precious minerals.
You'd probably have much more knowledge on that than I would, Councillor Fisher.
Yeah.
I don't see it in our lifetime.
No. For the quantities of scale too, I think in that space you'd need to have a big one to do it. But yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those ones there that, you know, there's sort of different groups are talking about it, but it does have some complexities as far as you're breaking that actual capping.
Yeah, that's right.
And that as well.
And the risk associated with it, you know, the
Yeah.
pros and cons,
Yeah.
you'd have to really weigh up
worth it.
carefully.
Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. You're talking about sporting activities. That one at Gracemere is pretty high. The BMX track or another pump track would be good there.
Well, now we've
They'd
got a
love
spare
that.
around. We've got who wants a landfill?
Yeah, so just Patrice's presentation, it says we've got to let leasees and purchasers of land that's an old landfill know. So on our computer system, does a red flag come up anywhere? Or has that got to happen yet?
It'd be on the GeoCortex system. So we'd any land that we'd potentially lease or dispose would have that knowledge of it. Unless it's one that's we don't know, no one knows about.
No, we have a layer in GeoCortex around all of our closed landfills.
Yeah.
And that's how the dial before you dig process works that Patrice mentioned a little bit earlier. I get an email typically 2 or 3 times a week as a referral for a dial before you dig, where I need to go back and go through our records and confirm whether it is or it isn't, you know, whether there is or isn't a risk of whether they're going to be finding waste in their excavation. So.
Yeah, just through the chair. So let's say someone was digging around their yard and found all this rubbish that's been, put there and covered over, because, I mean, there was just rubbish tips everywhere. and on private properties, what do we do then? Do we put it on our register or just don't want to know about it?
No, you'd have to go and register. I mean, if it was identified.
We'd have to identify the extent of it? And
It would, the way to go about it, councillor, would be to first of all investigate whether it was in fact a Rockhampton Regional Council landfill at some stage. So there's a process to go through with the history side of things. So we would normally take it through and have a look at historical photos and go through historical records with land tenure and land use over time, because there's a number of landfills in the city that have been privately used landfills and tips. So it's not necessarily Rockhampton Regional Council's responsibility if that was the case. So it's sort of just going through those old records. You can note it in, council could note it in their records, but it's really finding out more history about it to assign responsibilities and what may in fact happen with it.
Yeah, just through the chair, I was just thinking, in the early days, it was just all big paddocks everywhere, and there's sure to be, things buried.
That's private, yeah. There's lots
Yeah.
of, that's the way they deal with their waste, councillor. The old
Yeah.
rural ones would just dig a hole and cover it up.
But even in Rocky, that would have happened, surely.
Yeah.
In the 1800s.
Thank you. Councillor Mathers?
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to say it's really heartening to see that Rockhampton Regional Council have been and are continuing to be responsible and for these sites that we've been responsible in the past. So I just want to congratulate Michael and his team for doing what they're doing now and working with Patrice to make sure that we're, taking care of these and monitoring them as well. One question I've got, Mr Mayor, if it's all right with you, through to Patrice. When we're talking about the capping, Patrice, you were saying we're going through and testing some of these to check the depth, and you're saying the depth should be around 500 mil. When does that actually when's that measurement, is that when it's first capped or later on? Because obviously soil subsides, so, you could put 500 mil over it today, but in 20 years' time, it's going to be reduced. So when is that measurement?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. It's when the soil's actually placed on the material, but it's to be compressed, like it's not just loose soil put on there. So when we go through and do the test pitting across the site, like we've gone out with Alton Downs and Boulder Combe and those sites, that's many years after the soil's been placed there when we've done the testing. So when the soil's actually placed on there, we allow more material. Yeah, it's not just half a metre, it's usually about 750 or something like that that's placed on there. And when it's put on there, it's actually compressed as well.
Okay,
yeah,
that makes
rolled,
sense.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
If I can just add, councillor, it's not just soil.
Yeah.
It's actually clay
Yeah.
with a specified permeability requirement of that, so that it won't allow, a certain amount of water to penetrate it.
And legislation's changed over time. No, if you're building a new landfill, it wouldn't only just be to cap it when it's closed, but you've got to put a clay liner on underneath the landfill now to stop any leaching as well. So it's like a...
Well, Mr Mayor, if you don't mind, while I'm learning then, because I didn't realise we had clay and then soil, the trees with the shallow root system that were blown over during Marcia, why is it the roots can't penetrate into the material that's underneath? Is it because it's compacted, or is it because there's no nutrients there that the roots want to go down any further?
Believe most of it's to do with the physical material that's underneath. So a lot of those areas where we investigated was because it was concrete or car bodies and that sort of stuff. Yeah, it was a physical.
Because normally you see roots go through concrete, you see go around steel and all that sort. But it's just too hard of work for it to do it, so they just spread out.
Yeah.
Probably, Mr Mayor, if I could, it's probably ask you the question, would you like to live in a rubbish dump?
No, not at all.
So trees don't either.
Yeah, so they just stayed,
No.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mathers. Councillor Kirkland, then Councillor Rutherford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just coming off mute there, and I suppose my question was a little bit of what Councillor Mathers just said about the trees. It is around the trees and where there's trees that have been established or other vegetation that's been established, Patrice, and also I want to say thank you for your presentation, of course. Those trees, how do you actually remove them, or do you say, okay, these trees are, we keep them here? How do you navigate that process, given that there is always the risk that the tree would be fell for whatever reason and uproot?
Well, most Councillor Kirk, most of the ones at the Kershaw blew over in the cyclone. That was the reason they exposed a lot of that material there. Anyway, but then the assessment that would have been undertaken after that to gauge where the landfill actually was, it was quite an expensive exercise to go through there and then remediate it back to where it was. So, and there's still further work there because it was such a large site, a number of locations for that. So, if there's another answer on the trees, I'm not sure if there is on that.
It's a good question. It's probably it's probably just one of those checks, an audit on the final rehabilitation that was done on the recommendations, just to check off on what was done with the final works, I think, Mr Mayor.
I just remember when my time with the environmental portfolio that we had the phytocapping trial at the Lakes Creek landfill. Dr Ashwin, was it Ashwin? And there was a number of different plants that you could have put on there instead of clay capping, and they were looking at whether the phytocapping was an option and a cheaper option than spending it on soil. But I don't think it went very far. But he had a number of different plant species growing on top of a landfill during that trial. So Councillor Fisher probably heard a bit more. You were probably at the start of that before my time.
Yeah, actually, that was my very first project I was ever involved in England. It was actually a phytocapping project, which became an international garden festival in Liverpool in England. And that was where I first came across it, and that it's still still good debate. As recently as only a few weeks ago at LawMac, there was we had a panel discussion on phytocapping and the various projects. What it's coming back to, it's horses for courses. There are some tree species that are very, very good, but Kershaw Gardens and Cyclone Marcia was the best educational tool I think we could ever have had, because we actually learned there were some species there that just were not suitable to be planted anywhere near a landfill. There were other species there that had that penetration, and the idea of the phytocapping is to draw out all of that sort of toxic cocktail that sort of sits in the bottom of the landfill. And some trees were doing that. The trial that Ashwa and AJ did back in the early 2000s, that was actually a very good trial because it broadened the trial for even bamboo and species like that, and the bamboo there is just has got so much potential. But I might try to see if with the details from the LawMac meeting we could get to the councillors. Patrice, you're involved in a number of phytocapping trials, is that right?
I have been, yeah.
Yeah.
And your view on the phytocapping, is it?
Oh, look, it's got applications with it, but as Councillor Fisher says, that the findings from Kershaw is just gold.
Yeah.
What it feeds into the whole exercise on the species it can work. Phytocapping's got its place.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So
species
Tom White, and bless him, was the idea of that phytocapping that he'd put there, planned up an old landfill before all the trials and tests went ahead. So
yeah, someone can do a PhD on Kershaw Gardens on phytocapping, I'm sure.
Okay, is that to finish your question, Councillor Kirkland? Thank you. Councillor Rutherford, then Councillor Wickerson.
Yeah, I guess mine's on the trees as well, and the ability to sort of continue to plant trees at Kershaw Gardens and the like. Is there a magic number for depth of soil that you feel would be safe to start to plant some larger trees back, or is that not an option again?
Look, I'm not an expert in that field, but there's certainly enough research that's been done that we can draw upon. And I think it's probably, from what we've learned at Kershaw, it's probably more with smaller species than what we've planted there before, with shrubs and things like that, rather than the big trees we've had there before.
Yeah, I guess I have a bit of a theory. They often talk about if you fertilise and water your lawn a lot, the roots all stay very close to the surface because that's where they get easy water,
access.
easy nutrients. And I think Kershaw Gardens was a bit the same. Why would they bother putting their roots through deep rubbish when they were getting everything from across the top? So, yeah, I just, into the future, if you know, touch wood, we were to get another cyclone and more trees came down and we did unearth rubbish again, do we go back to scratch then as far as the landfill?
Look, I think to answer the questions on Kershaw, Councillor Rutherford, the best thing to do is that we have a look at the recommendations that were made from the detailed site investigation, and then we have a look at what the remediation was done, and then we have a bit of a gap analysis to say, well, were all those recommendations implemented? And then we have then the recommendations that come out of it, and then we have we have a bit of a workshop on that, and then take it forward, because there's so many questions and maybe so many answers that come out of it, and that's part of it, rather than trying to solve them all today, because it'll be a really interesting piece of work that we can delve into, and the trees and the learnings from it and a whole bunch of things. Because I've got some concerns, but you know, maybe it's a bit like the rugby park when you go back in a few years later and you go and do some of that testing, it may not be the concerns that I have.
Yeah, maybe. And I think I'd be really keen to understand what's still there, whether it is covered enough, given the heavy usage that area has for all ages. I think you know, we need to make sure that we've done that right, but also moving forward into the future, the capacity to plant some more shade trees in our climate would be great to be able to do as well. Sure. So,
Thanks, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Wickerson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillor Fisher reminded me a story about the landfill mining, and funny enough, it was a resource sector that had a dubious history of burying all their tyres off these great big dump trucks when they were no longer useful, until they couldn't get new tyres, and then they went back over these their dump sites and dug up all these tyres again and found they were perfectly serviceable. So we change our attitude towards, you know, what's rubbish one day and what's valuable the next day. So it's not as far-fetched as it might sound, what we might dig up in the future, whether it's old computer parts for the gold or who knows what. But the question goes back, Patrice, just to clarify my head, you were talking about the monitoring, particularly groundwater monitoring, and my understanding is that's just to measure. You would think logically over time that would get less and less as the landfill gets older. But what would trigger, would there be something in that monitoring that might trigger a council having to excavate a site out totally, or did you mean it was future legislation changes might mean that council has to come back and totally get rid of that material, dispose of it properly, and then rehabilitate the site? Is that what you meant, or could we find something with the monitoring that might trigger that sooner?
Yeah, great question. The monitoring that we do, it's compared against Queensland and national guidelines on water quality objectives and limits for ecological and health indicators. And when you look at a potentially contaminated site, you take samples upstream and downstream, both in, say, creeks, but also groundwater bores, and you compare whether it's a contaminated site or a landfill. You compare upstream and downstream. So we do that for all the landfills that are operating in the closed landfills. So we do that. We have been doing that for these sites since 2014. So if these sites were indicating that downstream was worse than upstream, well, we'd say you've got to go back and dig them out, or you'd need to do something and remediate them. But we've got enough data now that we're confident that these landfills are not causing impacts. It's not worse downstream than what it is upstream. So it's just keeping an eye on those. And yes, say for example, we said, wow, there's something going on in here downstream, well then there'd be investigation to see if it is coming from the landfill or from somewhere else, which would be very unusual given the amount of data that we do have.
Yep, no, very good. And just the second part of that, and it's still related, and it wouldn't be feasible on the bigger ones like we've seen up on the screen, but some of the smaller ones, thinking Marmor maybe or Bejewel, the cost benefit of ongoing monitoring over the next whatever years, compared to maybe excavating it now of our own volition, you know, would that open up? Would it be more cost effective to do that on a smaller site where there might be just pockets of historic waste put? And would it open up more opportunities to use that land for recreation or something else if we were to get rid of it all now?
Once those sites come off the Environmental Authority, once it comes off your licence, your requirements to do ongoing monitoring sort of disappear as well, because you've been able to prove that the site's not causing environmental harm. So it's something that's just there, and council may decide just to do monitoring, do some testing every couple of years or something like that, because you've sort of put it to bed, like a lot of the other closed landfills you've got around the place anyway. So, and the likelihood of having to dig them out is very, very minimal, really, in the scheme of things. It's more, if you were having to dig yours out, so would every other council in Queensland, sort of thing. So the likelihood of that happening is very, very low.
But the monitoring is over 30 years, is that right?
No.
It's not?
No, it's only if you were worried about a particular site.
Okay.
If you'd have a little spike every now and then, or someone had some cattle die downstream, you thought, oh, geez, that's downstream of our old landfill, we better go back and do some testing, because your bores will still be in place, and you may choose to go and do sampling every now and then. But the cost of that's pretty minimal for doing your sampling.
Okay, no, very good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Wilkinson. Thanks, Patrice and Ned.
Thank you.
Councillors, no more questions. We might move the officer's recommendation that the landfill management report be received. Councillor Latcham moves, seconded Deputy Mayor Councillor Fisher. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thanks very much, Michael. Thanks very much, Patrice. Ned.
See you next time.
We'll move on to our next item, councillors. I'm not sure whether we want to take a recess and then come back into that one. Council, we might take a 10-minute recess and come back at 10:30, if that's not too sharp. Can I move that we take a 10-minute recess? Seek a seconder. Deputy Mayor Councillor Fisher. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine. Everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line. Ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine. Everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line. Ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine. Everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line. Ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine. Everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line. Ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
laughter in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, councillors. I'll have a mover and a seconder that we resume the meeting. Move Councillor Mather, seconded Councillor Wickerson. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. We might move on. We'll move on to 10.3, the Waste Education Plan for 2023, and hand over to Michael for that presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor and councillors. Yeah, we got in, getting it a little bit earlier this year. I think this time, for the 2022 plan, I think we might have presented to council in about February, March of this year. So we thought we'd get in before the year starts. So the plan for 23 that has been provided is really just outlining our key priorities and plans for the year. And it's also a really important piece of work or document for that sort of Kelly relies on to sort of, work out what she's going to do and how she plans out her year. It's very difficult. It's very easy for us to get distracted throughout the year with all of these shiny things, and then we sort of have a bit of a scattergun approach and we kind of don't achieve a lot, but we're very busy doing it. So this is to try and keep a little bit of discipline also around what we do throughout the year as well. So this is obviously supported by our waste strategy as well, having an annual education plan. There's two other important parts of our waste strategy around education. That's developing our long-term community engagement plan, which we've made some good progress on in the last few months with the support of our comms team doing that as well, and delivering a regional education campaign in partnership with CQ Council. So that one there, before I get onto this plan, been doing a lot of work with the state government. It's taken, I'm going to say, 18 months to get them to the table, but they are now at the table, and they are preparing and working with a number of councils, we're one of them, to develop a statewide, state-led education campaign to help with the two-bin system. And then if an organics bin is added to that curbside offering, then it would also include that third bin. So I won't go into the plan in too much detail. I'll just sort of touch on some highlights. So the educational priorities for 23, it's obviously continuing the Recycling Hero School program. At the back of the report, you will see that, we've got 13 schools actively enrolled in that program. We've got 2 that have recently declined that have done it in previous years, but they're continuing on with an element of that work themselves. We've got 5 schools expressing an interest to join in that program. We've got a couple that are sort of either on the cusp or Kelly's currently negotiating with them to try and bring them into that program. Based on resourcing, we are really limited to trying to bring on 5 new schools in any one calendar year, so we're confident we'll get those 5 schools for next year. Some events, so, you know, Clean Up Australia Day, we're not going to lead it, but we'll support it as we've done in recent years. International Compost Awareness Week, National Recycling Week. We will sort of do some comms around those, and I think with the additional support and work we're doing with our comms team as well, that will only improve on this year that we've just had. One thing we're going to get back into this year is our pop-up stalls. So hoping sort of every couple of months, every second months, to get out somewhere in the community. It'll probably just be Kelly and myself, or Kelly and George. It'll only be two of us. It's pretty simple. It's very low cost. I'll come for free. But it's really important when I talk to Kelly about just trying to get out there and in amongst the community, supporting them, hearing what challenges and issues they're having with our services, and really the long-term objective around this one is to try and build potentially some street campaigns that we can get some momentum, and in order to get sort of the most bang for our buck around communications, we need to build a list of willing residents who will give us their email addresses, that we can sort of send them out a bi-monthly newsletter, and we can really start engaging with them on our services, and then we use those people to sort of influence the people around them. Curbside recycling campaign, that's an ongoing part of what we need to do, and I think probably from March we'll see a change to some extent of what we're doing, because that state-led education behaviour change program, we're expecting that to kick off around March, so I'm really hoping to be able to ramp up what we do and our visibility and the messaging around that two-bin system. You know, we need to get the recyclables out of the red-lidded bin, we need to get the contamination out of the yellow-lidded bin. And then there's a lot of ancillary activities as well around getting the Gracemere Waste Transfer Station up and running properly with the right signage and all that sort of stuff once it's redeveloped, helping with the education centre, and we continue to run school groups and other groups through there, obviously continuing with the FOGO champions, who are the residents who have continued to retain that FOGO bin on the curb. So it's a pretty busy year, but I think I'll probably leave it at that.
I've got a couple of questions there. I think, the diversion from the waste stream is what it's about, and education is a big key to that. And Kelly and Michael and the team, they've fantastic job over the years, and I think to keep the momentum up, it's one that we get into the younger students through those school education programs. It helps to feed back into the family and how that process goes. So I've got a number of lights on. Councillor Latcham, did you want to say anything?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And probably the only question or comment to make on it is, like, Kelly's doing an exceptional job in her role as education officer, and my question is probably more around the lines of, do we have someone as an understudy working with her in the future? Is that the plan, to have someone to be able to assist and as this grows? Because I know from a CQ Rock point of view, they're talking about wanting another waste education officer. Is this something down the track that we should be aiming to have someone as well in the pipeline?
It's probably not one from a council perspective. Councillor Fisher just said it may be one we can start to advocate for and see if we can get that through state government to help in that space with the transition and what they're talking about with levies.
Yeah, I think Mayor and Councillor Latcham, I think through this education behaviour change program, I know the state government does have $16.4 million worth of funding available for this over the next 4 years. And I think potentially aligned with the finalisation of the Regional Waste Management Plan, I'm now starting to hear that in addition to just providing us with some collateral and some toolkits, there may actually be some funding there for people on the ground.
Yeah.
So there may potentially be some support there financially to have a regional resource as well.
It makes sense. They're doing it with the disaster and bushfire stuff. So we've got an officer there that we've been able to fund for 2 years. So it's a process there that they need to support councils in that space. So yeah, good point, Councillor Lutcham. It's one we'll keep an eye on and see if we can develop an application to lobby for that.
Thank you.
Got a number of questions on, so I might go to the lights on the table and Councillor Smith and then Councillor Kirkland, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a statement. I'm so disappointed that we're not doing we don't have funding for the calendars this year. I know it's now under environmental, but it started out to be waste and recycling for the schools. And the winners, we're really excited when they were featured in the calendar. So just really disappointed that there was no money there this year for those calendars, and that because they really involved the schools in the waste and recycling.
First I knew about it, Councillor. So where's the money gone to environment to do that calendar?
Yeah, Environment's been running that for the last probably 3-4 years.
4 years.
I'm not aware that that's not continuing. I don't know.
Councillor Kirkland?
Yeah, the calendar is not continuing. It's just we're still continuing with that program of making sure that we have a competition and the students get given gifts. We go out, we present the school with a small token presentation just for what they've been doing in the space of environment, and that will continue. The cost of the producing the calendar was something that had to be negotiated out of the budget because of constraints that have been put on the environment team to deliver other projects so that are ongoing. So that was a decision that was made within the environment team. Yeah.
So
it's operational. Operational.
The waste one was the one that was decided not to do it in there back 4 years ago?
Oh, it just transitioned over. It just transitioned over for, I think, for the first year or two. We took up a few of the key months around National Recycling Week and Compost Week and that, and we provided our budget provided some funding for it. But I am aware that there's a lot of, it's a lot of work involved in running that program. Probably one of the reasons why we weren't that unhappy about handing it over to the environment team, because we just didn't have time to run it.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, that's the other thing, Mr Mayor, through you. It is that the team is very small in the environment team, and they have they're spinning a lot of plates at the moment, and that was just resourcing was also definitely a contributor to that decision.
Right, thanks, Councillor Kirkland. Do you have a question?
Actually, what I wanted to do was to commend Michael and especially Kelly, who the schools just love, her coming along and doing her training program. And whenever I read these reports from you, Michael, and your team, I'm just very pleased at how you dot every I and cross every T. And so congratulations, and yeah, looking forward to what you're able to unpack next year within what you've presented to us today. Well done.
Thank you. Councillor Rutherford, then Deputy Mayor, Councillor Fisher.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Firstly, can I once again congratulate you on the report and the work that you've already done. So what I'm about to say, please don't take as a negative. It's just as a different path. So Michael, I guess the question I'm going to ask you is, have we measured, or can we measure the success of the programs that have been run to date? Can you measure in place for what this program will deliver in the next 12 months? And not that I think any of it is wrong, I think it's really good. But in my mind, I keep going through, how do we get messages? How do you ingrain things into a community? And I keep coming back to the Slip, Slop, Slap campaign, the Cancer Sun Safe campaign, and that ad that just ran over and over, slip, slop, slap, until everyone was absolutely convinced in their head that was, and there was actually a report that said it was funny because it had run so long, everyone had learnt the lesson, so they stopped and they channelled their funding into something else. And then this new generation of children came through that didn't know the slip, slop, slap message, so they sort of started again. So that's where my brain is going. Is it an ad that runs on TV that is a very simple message that just goes over and over for, a number of years, that gets a message through, rather than a whole pile of really labour-intensive, time-intensive education sessions? So that's where I'm coming from.
No, and I appreciate that, and I don't take that in a bad way.
Probably if I could chime in on that one, it was probably the council's decision to step out of the CQ LGA, where there was dollar for dollar funding from that contribution by councils, where there was a really heavy education program with ads and recycling heroes and campaigns there. Once Rocky Regional Council pulled out of that association, it lost all the funding and all the supports that we were doing in that. It's been a hard slog since then to try and get that same level with a reduced budget, so to speak. We're probably still spending the same amount of money on what we were doing when we were part of a larger group, but...
I understand that, Mr Mayor, but we're still spending money, so are we spending it in the right way, and I guess, I don't know if it happens anymore, but the television stations used to have to give a certain amount to community service messaging and things like that, so I don't think it's too late. I think we could still be doing that messaging, and whether other councils wanted to jump on board with that same message,
It's a change space again too, with all the different the reduction in the local networks and daily paper has been a reduced approach that we have to do with all social media and Instagram and all the other ones that are out there now. You're competing to a limited demographic with each of them as well. So it's the school education is where you probably get the bigger bang for the buck, where those children are taking that home to the families and getting that education in that way. So look, I'm not an expert in it. I just think I voted against that one, that we stepped out of that organisation, and I think it's been a struggle to try and hit the mark going forward. And Michael will probably clarify it. It's that diversion from the waste stream and the data that you see there with contamination in recycling, that you need to keep that continual messaging up. Otherwise, you'll end up with a bigger problem.
And that's what it'd be interesting to hear from Michael as to whether we've actually seen any changes and whether we can measure it.
Yeah, so there's some key KPIs that we monitor, and we do monitor them. So it's diversion from landfill, it's contamination in the yellow lidded bin, and contamination in the FOGO bins for those participants, and also the resource recovery rate across the whole bin system. So if we look at the whole bin, the whole composition of the waste across the 2-bin system, and the recoverable resources, then what percentage of those resources are we recovering? We're not getting the results we want or we need at the moment. I think to answer one of your questions there, I think the only approach that's going to get us to where we need to be needs to be a high-level campaign, which is on TV, the radio, like a really high-profile campaign similar to the Slip, Slop, Slap. In parallel with the boots on the ground doing the hard yards. It's going to be both that we need to make this work. It's going to take a long time. The other thing that is very clear, that we can't just say, well, let's go out and really hit it hard for 3 months and we'll turn them around. We need to hit it hard with this slip, slop, slap and boots on the ground, and then we need to maintain it forever. Like it's an ongoing program that we can just never stop, because we know that as soon as we stop, within a fairly short period of time, the results will just tail off. I really do think that as well, in the next, and on the back of this statewide led program at the moment, We're looking at benchmarking across different councils around those key metrics to say, well, why are they getting, 15% contamination and we're getting 20? Why are they getting, 60% resource recovery rate and we're only get 45? And that. We're also asking for the experts to try and come up with based on what we need to do, this is where we are today, this isn't where we need to get to. What do we need to do and what's it going to cost? Give us a cost per property to roll out a program year on year on year that will deliver us those results. I was in Melbourne last week, and the Recycling Victoria, which is the new entity down there who's a regulatory body as well, and they sort of manage all the local governments and the procurement and stuff, they're advocating for education communication budget to be 5% of the total waste budget. For us, that'd be about $1.2 million a year. I spend a little over 100. So I'm not asking for 1.2, but I think within a year or two I'll be probably asking you for 300 or 400.
Yeah. Mr Mayor, I guess, and certainly the education at the schools is an important thing, and I'm not knocking it at all, but we've been doing it for a lot of years, and I'm not sure we're seeing, and if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome, what they say, that's the definition of insanity, So I don't know whether we need to have a rethink about how we send this message. And
we've got some really good data on the schools that we've been in, a pre-audit and a post-audit, and the results at those schools that are in that program are exceptional.
And I'm sorry, Mike, I don't doubt that at all, but I do wonder whether once they're, because the children that we would have started would now be at least teenagers, young adults. So does it translate to outside of that school environment as they get older? And it doesn't appear that that's...
So what we're going to do this year, which we haven't done before, correct me when I'm wrong, is that we're going to then try and connect in with the parents. So, we've been in there and we've been talking to the students, and we've been changing their behaviours and making them more aware of what needs to be done and the reasons why. And we're kind of asking them to go home and influence what happens in their household. But this year, Callie's looking at running some surveys and some interaction programs with some of the family communities to try and broaden that reach, to try and help the students go back to their families and have that impact. So not sure exactly, how that's going to work, but I guess, we're trying to take our learnings on board and go, well, we're having that amount of impact, but how can we make that better through that program? Because it is a successful program, but if we can build on that program and make it even better, I guess that's what we're going to but that's what we're going to do this year, and then this time next year we'll be able to see whether that's had any additional impact.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Fisher, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'd like to touch on a couple of comments. Firstly, I'm very, very impressed with what has been presented in this report, and I know that what we have been doing in Rockhampton is something that many of our other communities within northern Queensland are quite envious on. And councillors, I'd like to, and Mr Mayor, I'd like to just make a comment. In June, Kelly was actually in a panel on waste education and awareness program with Robert Ferguson from LGAQ, Kylie Hughes from DES, as well as other leaders in the behavioural change and education programs. And Kelly was able to put forward the vision that she saw for Rockhampton that had, I think, most other councils actually in awe of what we've been able to do and literally doing for a very small amount of money. If you can imagine, people like Christine Blanchard in the area that the local government that she was working on, they had so many resources, and yet we had one person who was our education officer that was actually giving really good advice. But Kelly has actually been giving advice to other local governments as well to get their programs up. So I think it's sort of something that the waste and recycling team under Michael there are doing and kicking some really major goals. The next stage is we're probably looking out over the horizon, and it's where we've got to lobby with our other local governments to have a share of that education budget from the state. At the moment, it's still, councillors, we've still got a southeast corner versus the rest of Queensland. What is happening in the southeast corner doesn't always work for regional Queensland, and this is something that we've got to work on. But to have that, as Councillor Rutherford rightly said, a message that we could actually have right through regional Queensland is very, very important. And I think sometime in the next 6 months, we'll actually see some progress there. And I think that we've got to just have it so SecRock and what they've put forward as education doesn't quite fit what really regional Queensland needs and can actually get some benefit for. But I think there is room to work for a really good, strong message, but a message there that gets the behavioural change, not just the education. We've got to change the habits of the general public. So I think there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes, and hopefully that we can use a lot of state money. Other people's money is always so much better, that we could actually get some benefit in our local area. And probably the last comment I would like to make, Mr Mayor, if that's okay, is I know that I think you were the chair at the start for the Recycling Heroes program. And that is one that I think through Kelly has been giving that a lot more importance. And I think that within the local Rockhampton region, that Recycling Hero program is still something that I think there is a lot of potential for, and so having that support. But overall, this program is what's been put forward, I think is very, very good, and probably the envy of most of local governments in North Queensland.
Thanks, Councillor Fisher. Councillor Smith.
I just want to make a quick comment. Michael's talking about taking the education to the parents, because nearly every bottle now and every can's worth 10 cents. So I think it's sort of happened automatically that they are recycling, but they're getting paid for it. And I think that's been a huge thing. It's still a pain to have to recycle all your other glass and everything else. Cardboard and paper and metals and that. You still got to take that to a transfer station. That is an effort for a lot of people, but the fact that you're getting paid for all our bottles and cans now, I think it's sort of happened a little bit automatically, and it's put that in their head about recycling.
Yeah, you're right. It's probably highlighted it, getting out of the waste stream. Okay, councillors, I think we've exhausted all the questions on that one. The recommendation is that councils be aware of the support education priorities 23 and how they are delivered to the community, in the community. Move Councillor Latcham. Happy to move that. Seconded Councillor Fisher. Put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, 10.4. Councillor Smith, did you want to leave the meeting, or did you want to just see if there's any... Unless there's anyone raises questions about the water one, She's
Further
moved
advice, Mr Mayor.
out.
Out. 10.4,
Out.
that particular matter out.
Right.
Does that
Okay.
make- Yep.
Well, did we deal with the whole report or just that item?
It's up to the council table if they wish to exclude just that one item. Yeah.
Okay, we might move Councillor Fisher that we exclude that item. Seconded. Councillor Mathers, that item, or that item, the Mount Morgan water supply, be dealt with last, and Councillor Smith step out of the room during that process. So, and move seconded Councillor Mathers. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Hand over to you. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Mayor, councillors. I'd just like to present the capital project report for November. So the hail damage insurance claim, so that program's now coming to an end. There is a couple of roofs out of the igloos that is not on this report that we are doing as well, and the North Rocky sewage treatment plant, the roof there still has to be completed. So it's a couple of minor projects there. The Alliance maintenance facility at the airport. So that project's now nearing the end. Unfortunately, the rain has put back the ceiling of the car park till next Monday. They're going to try and get that done next Monday now. And they've got a little bit of work to be done to finalise the epoxy coatings in the hangar area. And then in the new year, they'll just have to finalise the landscaping around the car park. NBN's been, all the cabling, everything's been connected there, and they're still working on the power connection. So that's with the Alliance people. Botanic Gardens and Zoo redevelopment. So we have been out to tender for the visitor hub and operational centre. Unfortunately, that tender offer has come back in well and over our capital budget. So we're looking at re-tendering that package with a visitor hub going out as a separate smaller contract, and the car park works up there to be tendered out shortly. The package 3, the playground, work is well underway up there. All the civil works is about 90% complete, and the playground installation, they commenced on site yesterday, so site's set out. So they'll work obviously up until the Christmas break to see how much we can get done in the installation of the playground, and then the dingo will be installed in the new year. The Eagle enclosure, so we have awarded that contract to Hutchinson's, so there has been a pre-start. They intend to commence on site on the 15th of January. Glenmore Water Treatment Plant upgrade, so work continues there. All the demolition now has been completed in the control room. The work on the dosing shed, it's cladded, and they are doing the electrical installation internally. We are out at the moment for stage 2, which is the sediment tank. Work on the sediment tank, scrapers and the lamella tubes. So that'll close on the 14th of December. Gracemere and South Rockhampton STP strategy, so there's a number of projects associated with that. The new caustic dosing system at South Rocky, so we've got the final designs, and I have issued a variation package to Haslam Constructions to look at that project. The new wet well for sludge pump station, planning works has been undertaken on that. Design installation of pen stocks and bioreactors, work did start last week on that. However, with the rain and the inflows, we had to stop. So they're looking at recommencing installation of those pen stocks on Wednesday, and they are going to start also the construction and installation of the effluent reuse pump station next Monday. Upgrade of the sludge lagoons, so Gracemere is completed, and they're working on both South Rocky and North Rocky, so desludging and desilting those sludge lagoons. Sewer diversion from Gracemere to South Rockhampton, so work is in final stages, I suppose, of design of the pipeline. We still have to do the detailed design work on the pump station. and we are looking at using the contract we will get for the Mount Morgan pipeline. Yep.
You want to talk on the pipeline on that one? So, Councillor Smith, did you want to? Do we want to vote on the other ones before we go into the pipeline one?
He hasn't completed all
I
the
haven't.
projects.
Sorry.
He just diverted then to
Yep.
okay, that's what happened. Just finish off the rest of the projects, Andrew.
Yep,
but
so
nothing-
Gracemere also we're looking at, we've issued a variation for a new installation of aerators out there. Glenmore Water Treatment Plant, solar farm, so we have, the tender has been closed and adjudicated and we've awarded to GEM Electrical. They'll start work obviously in the new year on the installation of that solar system.
Councillor Rutherford, I thought we were going to have a look at the business case on that one.
Yeah,
Is that your question?
Yeah.
The business case is, it's not the business, it's just the payback period, basically, that's all it is. And that report's being prepared now, it's on its way.
But if we're starting it, I thought it was quite over budget and...
No, it's within budget, it's scaled back, and the component we're doing now is almost there's no choice. This is the piece that we bought, the frames and all
The
that.
tracking system has
Tracking
been procured and
system.
is
So
on
this
site.
just doing the minimum, and we'll give you that report on payback. And if council decides not to proceed, then we'll stop these guys. But we had to kind of hook them in at this stage. But in all honesty, we can't let a tracking system sit in a shed and do nothing. That's an unfortunate situation, but yeah, it is.
Can we not sell it?
Oh, for nothing. Throw a couple $1 million away.
Right, thanks, Andrew.
Yep, Mount Morgan Pool. So the community information session was held on the 9th of November, and survey information has been used to inform the tender. So that tender is now out. We'll close on the 18th of January next year. North Rockhampton sewage treatment plant upgrade. So work continues over on site. All the piling work's been completed and they've demobilised from site. Structures, about 75% of the concrete structure on the inlet works is completed. They've poured all the floor slab for the bioreactor in the oxidisation ditch, and they are working on the walls. And hopefully tomorrow we'll pour the major beams on the clarifier. That what they're trying to do is obviously get out of the ground before the end of the year. So the next major pour would be the clarifier slab. Rockhampton Airport parking, so that obviously project's now complete, and they're just working on improvement on the reliability and any issues there. Rockhampton Airport screen security upgrade, so there's an official opening now program for the 15th of December, I think, on that project. Arthur Street Pump Station, so tender have closed on that, and we're currently adjudicating those offers that have been received.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Wickerson?
Thanks, Mr Chair. And this isn't one that's on the list, Andrew, but at a ratepayers last night, Councillor Smith and I were there. Residents were inquiring about the boat ramp at Inkerman Creek, when they're expecting both there, but they're in stages, I know. My understanding is that we've done some of the base work of the car park and the access road in just to let it settle on the mud. Is that right? Is that the current
Martin might be able to give us an update on that one.
And just wondering, is it appropriate that that project be on this list for future, just updates, or are they separate because there's maritime involved?
They're only separate at this point in time because they're not being managed by Andrew. I'm basically project managing that one at this point in time. The Inkerman Creek site has had the earthworks done and the pre-loading. That pre-loading had to be in place for 12 months. That 12 months is up in February next year. And so the work will then recommence on the construction of the car park proper and the boat ramp proper.
Thanks, Martin. So the pre-loading is you put more material on than you need, and it
basically
pushes
to
it,
compact
pushes it into the mud.
Yeah, basically compact
and
the
then
mud
scrape it
underneath
off.
so it doesn't move around too much after that.
Okay, no, thank you very much.
Okay. And then the Casuarina one is down the track, yeah. Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Kirkland, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask about on page 49 of your project delivery dashboard there, Andrew, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Andrew, just in the Gracemere and South Rockhampton STP strategy, there's a couple of points there. 1.3, the design and installation of the penstocks and bioreactors. That's a variation order. Was Haslam already doing that, or is it variation to what Haslam were already doing at Northside, and you've given them the opportunity to do this design? And I have a second question after that, if I may, Mr.
Yes,
Mayor.
through the chair. Look, we've approached Haslam to provide a variation. It's obviously on a separate treatment plant, but it's in line with the work that they're expert in. So, yeah, we've approached them. They've provided a cost estimate under a variation, and then we've engaged them to do the works.
Thanks, Andrew. Second question, Councillor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just point 7 there, the missing effluent pipeline. I'm sure you've probably mentioned it to us before, but can you refresh my memory on how we have a pipeline that went missing for effluent?
It's through the chair. It's the missing component of parts of an effluent line that went from Gracemere through to I think it's the Rocky Golf Club.
Right, yeah, where the
So it's
Arthur
just
Street
a
one.
missing
Okay.
section.
Yep.
It's probably better said incomplete.
Incomplete,
Yeah,
missing.
yeah.
No.
Just
I
an
was like,
incomplete project.
oh, what happened? Did we lose a pipe somewhere?
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you. I thought the same thing when I'd read it. It's but I knew the project, but I just thought that's not the right way to refer to it. But, thanks, Andrew. Okay, councillors, no further questions on those items that Andrew spoke about from the project. We'll have a move in a second, and then we'll deal with the other item as we go forward. So, happy to move, Deputy Mayor Councillor Fisher, seconded Councillor Smith. Put that. Those in favour. Those opposed, motion is carried unanimously, and we'll ask Councillor Smith to step out of the room, and we'll go to that other item. Okay, thanks, Andrew. We'll just talk to the other item. If there's any updates on that, or
Yeah, look, it just that the packages are all out at the moment, so we've done a major amendment to the current package, so it'll close 25th of January now, so it's probably...
and work's looking to complete, to start early...
Started early New Year, as soon as we get that package closed, adjudicated, get them on
February?
site.
It'll probably be March before they mobilise.
Yep.
Righto. Okay. That was the only thing I had. Any other questions, councillors, on that one? No. Okay. Well, Councillor Rutherford, do you want to move that one? I'll move. Councillor Rutherford second. Put that. Those in favour? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Andrew. That's
Thank you.
brings us to the end of that report. And we'll invite Councillor Smith back into the room, please. I hope you weren't sneaking into the bread rolls there, councillors. Oh, no. She checked. Councillor, we move on to item 10.5, the asset management plan for unsealed roads, and we'll hand over to Andrew to present that one. Councillor, it was workshopped, so we'll just go through that report from Andrew and then take it from there. Councillor Rutherford.
Mr. Mayor, it was workshopped, and we sort of, I guess, made the point that it wasn't going to meet the needs of the rural roads. So I'm just wondering why it's come back as is. So it identified the fact that the roads were just going to continue to fall apart. And
No, well, councillor, any wet season and an asset management plan like this can fall apart on rural roads. It could be a wet season that we're facing this year, and we'll need to amend that in the budget to be able to modify it. But
Mr.
I
Mayor,
think
that-
I'll
Through the
ask
chair,
Peter.
I'll just, look, my only comment is, why is it back? That is the asset plan as written at that moment. That's the budget allocated by council, and that's the condition of the roads. That's a factual report. And the only other comment I'll make is that every asset plan that we will bring to council will demonstrate it. Right now, I could categorically say every asset plan is currently underfunding its requirements. So,
but this drives the way the rural roads will be maintained over in the next few years.
It's
So
reflecting the current budget allocation by council.
Yes,
So in the
and
next-
how that money's going to be used.
So next year, in your budget deliberations, you could change that, and this plan then would be technically on a different path. But right, we had to show what budget council had allocated. Then they went and did all assess the roads, and that said, this is what's going to happen.
And councillor, you recall we lost $2 million from federal assistance grants. We had to look at ways we could reduce the impact to the ratepayers, and part of that was looking at the road maintenance, and part of that was both rural and urban. There's ways that we can advocate to say that we could change the federal assistance grant. We could get more of that next year, and that could put money back into that space. We could get more the following year. We could get less. It's hard to say at this point of time that asset management plan is not forever and a day at that point in time. Is that's...
I understand that, and as I stated at the workshop, the asset management plan, the work that's been done in it is really good. I don't have an issue. What I have an issue with is that it links to the choices that are being made as to how the roads are going to be maintained. And that's where it...
And that's what an asset management plan is, councillor. I'm not sure where your point...
Well, it's talks about on this classification of road, we're going to reduce the amount of gravel or the number of grades. On this one, we're going to do this. That's a whole different conversation. So that's a, you know, that really sets out how the rural roads, regardless of what sort of money there is, how the rural roads are going to be treated.
Mr. Mayor, can I make a comment on... Oh,
Peter,
sorry.
I'll let
I was just going
Peter
to say,
explain it first.
it's based on the current funding. That's what we will do. If the funding changed, we'd do something different. If you cut it back further next year, we'll actually do less grades and less trees. If you increase it, we'll do more. So it's very budget dependent. This is a valuable plan. This is telling you right now what the condition is today or back in 2019, and given the current allocation, this is what we believe will happen. So that's informing you.
Yep, and I get that, Peter, but I'm still saying the same thing. We're going to have a significant change in the way the rural roads are maintained from this point on.
Significant change, Peter?
Yes, there is a significant change in how they're maintained.
I don't know whether it's semantics about significant or not. There is a change because the budget has been reduced, and the plan says if it keeps that way over 10 years, there will be a reduction in the standard.
Peter, when we reduced the budget, you told us that you could do it without having a major impact on the rural roads. That's
Yes.
not what this plan is showing us at all.
If you recall, I said that we would drop it for 2 to 3 years. This plan says 10. So I'm still saying what I'm saying, that the drop over the next 2 to 3 years is not going to have a big impact. Right now, it has had no impact because we haven't changed anything. But if you leave it for 10 years, you'll have an impact.
Yep.
But I'm hopeful that in your budget processes,
also, and the point I'm trying to make is that we are seeing some issues now as it standard what we've been doing. This changes that again, that it drops the level again. So in the next 12 months, we will see an impact.
I can't say that, and all I can say is we have had no change to the current maintenance and capital allocation to rural roads yet. So if there's a change now, there's some other factor, because
This
fortunately...
plan says that, Peter. This plan talks about how everything's going to be reclassified, how the roads are going to, some roads, higher order roads, will be treated more often. Some of the lower order roads will be treated far less often. This is a complete change in how we've been doing things for that rural community. It says that's what the plan says. That's what Blue talked about when he was here, when we workshopped it. So the asset management plan, I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with what the offshoot of that is.
Yeah, through the chair, I can't answer that. I don't know of any change to the current activities out there.
The whole plan talks about it, Peter. It talks about the number of vehicles.
Where are you comparing apples with apples? Where are you getting the change from the one that you're talking about?
Can I make
It's it's in this plan.
Yeah, I think Councillor Rutherford's talking about page 77, and I was alarmed too when I first read it. But if you look at the higher order roads, it does explain further down that the future gravel coverage is less, because hopefully those higher order roads will be bitumen by then. So as we go through the list, we've only got 2 kilometres of roads that take 150 cars a day. So hopefully in the budget in the next few years, they'll be bitumen. I think it explains that. If you look further down, the lower order roads will actually have more gravel, but the higher order roads have less gravel because it's hoped that they would be bitumen. I think that's what that really means.
But where's the significant change? I'm just trying to understand. I'm saying you're saying there's a change, but significant change from what?
The number of times roads will be graded, what gravel goes on. Blue stood here and talked us through it all.
Peter, Martin?
If I could add, and Brett might just correct me if I'm wrong, but because of the reduction in budget, what the AMP does is explore 2 strategies, I think, and one of the strategies is essentially saying we will maintain our current grading, gravel coverage on our higher order roads, but to do that under a reduced budget, the gravel coverage and the maintenance grading frequency on the lower order roads will drop a little. So that's the change in strategy to accommodate the change in budget.
Yeah, that's correct, Martin. We had 2 scenarios for both of those. Either we reduce all the road classes a little bit, or we reduce the lower order roads a little bit more and keep those higher order roads at their current standards, because they experience a lot more vehicles and you're less likely to notice on those lower order roads a minor difference in roughness or the gravel coverage. I think we indicated there the speeds might drop, yes, slightly, the safe travel speed. So we don't believe it'll be really noticeable to people out there using the roads, that change. But we're just saying that's 2 options you can employ with the budget we currently have, because the cost to do the resheeting, the cost to do the grading can't really change. So if you have less money, you can only do less, you got less to spread around. So we just looked at different scenarios to achieve that with minimal impact.
Just on the microphone, Peter.
So the dramatic change, I'm not seeing. It's a tweak with 2 options, like I said, on how we maintain our roads.
There's even, and I was trying to find it. It's, you're talking about minimum 10 k's less speed that people are expected to travel, not to notice the difference. So you know yourself that if you're travelling 60 or 50, you do notice the difference.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I know we've had these discussions before in years gone by. Then we get a disaster and we can get betterment funding, you know.
We did, and we put it up to a grade
Yes.
from where it was. It was at a lower level, and
Yeah.
we brought it up a level.
And the betterment
because of that.
funding is a real windfall for
Yeah,
council.
and then we
Not
lost
that
$2 million from
Yeah.
the federal assistance grant
Yes.
out of roads.
I think there's been a couple of
And
reports to council.
it does note it in here, the reduction in funding, which is good, that it's noted, yeah.
But we have reported to council that you have used disaster funding to increase the standards and that eventually it's going to bite.
Yeah, there was going to be a point where we couldn't sustain that unless we had another disaster, and that could change at any time, and we'd be left with another problem. Sorry, Councillor Smith?
But last night we actually got another compliment about the roads. Mount Hopeful Road, Ulam Connection Road, they reckon they've never been better. The last job on them was really good, if you could pass that on to the road team. Yeah, but I know other areas, they're probably saying their roads have been worse they've ever been, but...
We need the community to advocate with us to say, let's bring that federal assistance grant money back up to a level where we can
and we probably
support it.
keep forgetting to say that, you know, we have lost that funding, and...
It's the reason why.
You know, yeah.
Councillor Wickerson?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I was going to say a similar thing, that when we first lost that FAGS funding at a ratepayers meeting out of Bejewel, we put it up to the community and said, look, you know, here's the bad news. They more or less accepted that. They said, look, no, we get that. You can only work with what you've got.
Yeah.
It comes down to mathematics. So hopefully the impact won't be too great on it. But I did note in the report also, it talked about maybe increasing the well, it's the wrong term for it, but spot maintenance. So if there's a patch there where there's potholes that come up or something, that we'll attend to those probably quicker than what we do now, so we can get on top of things before we have to do big long sections. You know, if you get corrugations or ruts or whatever, they tend to grow if you ignore them. So did I read that right? Probably to Peter, that we'll try and get on top of these little isolated rough bits quicker.
I'm not convinced there's a big delay now. So
No.
And what I think coloured the workshop last week or the week before was that was intermingled. This asset plan got intermingled with what Blue is thinking about how he might his approach to rural road maintenance, which is possibly going to be different to what his predecessor. But that's a separate issue altogether about how and what you do with road maintenance in a rural environment. This is just saying factually where we are.
Yeah. Okay. Done.
Okay, councillors. Brett, I think we've probably talked it out before we get to the presentation, but no, it was just a report. I think we've probably discussed it to detail there. Councillors, if there's no further questions, could I seek a move in a second with regards to the officer's recommendation for the plan? Happy to move. Councillor Smith, seconded. Councillor Wickerson. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those opposed? Councillor Rutherford, do you want to record your vote against that? The motion's carried. Okay, councillors, thank you. We have nil other items. Any urgent business? If not, I'll close the meeting. Councillors, we do have a workshop. We do have an information session coming up. But I'll close the meeting properly, and we'll talk to the other ones. Thank you.
not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
Taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing. Knew that we'd survive here and all the goodness we would bring. Of this I sing. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming in sunshine, everybody feeling fine. Everybody join the front line, ain't nobody left behind. Everybody swimming.
taking the good with the ups and downs. I wanna see how the world turns round. Let's go adventure in the deep blue sea. Home is with you wherever that may be. Home is with you wherever that may be.
Now that we've arrived here, I would not change a thing.